Good afternoon. Oh, thank you for being cooperative. I'm thrilled to be here. Before I start, I just want to take a moment. Wow, I'm very loud. Am I supposed to be this loud? Okay, fine. Oh, I got to get used to it. I want to take a moment just to acknowledge the energy and spirit of the indigenous folks in this land. It's just the way I like to start speaking every time. So I just want to say that first. And I'm grateful to be here and grateful that you're joining me. And I'm actually going to pretend like you're all in my living room. And we just got some time to talk together about what's going on, because that's what I'm most comfortable with. And I think that you will get a sense of things. But I'm going to start out by asking for your cooperation in something I'm not going to participate in because I'm so comfy in this chair. But I'm going to ask y'all to stand for a few things. No, not yet, not yet. Thank you. You are so cooperative. Oh, I'm loving it. So you can, this is a self-select kind of thing. You can stand if you want. You don't have to stand. It gives me, I'm just really trying to get a sense of the room and a sense of where we start with this conversation. So I'm going to say a few things, and if this fits for you, you stand up. And if not, you stay seated. It's all good. Stand up if you grew up in a house where there were plenty of books on the shelves. Wow, awesome. Have a seat. Stand up if you grew up in a house where alcohol and drugs were a problem. Thank you for acknowledging that, and have a seat. Stand up if you grew up in a house that had more than one television. Okay. Yes, it's interesting to notice who's standing, who's not. Let's take a look. I would be standing on that one. I think I'd be standing on all of them so far. Even though I'm not standing, I just want to let you know. I'd be standing up on all of them so far. Stand up if you know someone you love or yourself was ever racially profiled or religiously profiled. Thank you. You can sit down. Stand up if you grew up in a household where you regularly went on vacations. Wow, great. Thanks so much. We're almost done. It's a little bit of exercise, actually, so post-lunch exercise. Stand up if you grew up in a household, or if now you can pay the bills when they're due. Not that you do pay them, but you can pay them when they're due. All right, then. Have a seat. Stand up if you or someone you love have gone more than 6 months without employment in the last 2 years. Thanks so much. Have a seat. And the last one is stand up if you or anyone that you love is really concerned about how your child might be treated in a public school. Thanks so much. Okay, that just gives me an idea of who's visiting me at my house today when we're having this conversation. It's also something that you might want to do sometimes in a meeting with your folks or with other folks, just to get a sense of, just as Alice just talked about, where is our common ground? Where are some of the things both on the great side of what may be representative of the kind of background we want to have, lots of books on your shelves, or regular times with your family on vacations, or the bills get paid when they get to be paid, but also the hardships that we can also share. Violence in the home, or drugs or alcohol, or not feeling safe in a public school for all kinds of reasons, or not feeling safe in your community because you may be racially profiled. Those are also realities. Not realities we all share evenly, but realities in our lives. So I'm going to start talking to you about a little bit about the realities in my life and why I'm here where I am now, and hopefully some of the lessons that's brought to me. And I'm going way back to being a senior in college. I'm not going to tell you how long it was. But one of my honors areas in school was in political science, and at the time, I really thought I wanted to be in Congress, because I thought the national stuff, like Ben talked about earlier, national politicians, they're not really working for us. But maybe at a local level we can do something. So I wanted to meet Barbara Jordan. And I really wanted to go to graduate school, that's what I call it, in Austin, Texas. And so I went to Austin, Texas to meet Barbara Jordan. And I spent time with her, and she helped give me information for my honors thesis at that point. And when I left my weekend with Barbara Jordan, I knew I would never, ever, until there's at least as many political parties as I got fingers on one hand, run for Congress. What had happened to her, not unlike the attack that happened to Barbara Lee being the only person, they were on Barbara Jordan. And the things that she shared out, because I haven't done my internet research and I don't know what's out about her and what's not out about her, I'm not going to tell everything because I don't know. But, so I don't want to reveal anything that she revealed to me in confidence. But she made it very clear that because of who she was, her ideals, her principles, and her commitment to the people in Texas that she represented, she was being destroyed by the party. And part of the reason she died when she did, I have no doubt, is because of that pressure and what it did to her. And that, for me, was just one of those powerful moments. I feel blessed that I am on the planet and continue to walk through the planet with a loving heart and an expectation that everyone that I see has value, and with a refusal to judge or write anybody off. Well, thank you very much. But when I left that time with Barbara, I started that cynicism that now has been growing for a good 20 plus years, right? Started to bud. And the idea that really, people really may consciously want to undermine the power of the people in this country, I really did think that couldn't possibly be. And I still kind of believe that when I left Texas. And then when I graduated, I took my first job because I wanted to take a job. Now, first, I did really want to hang out with my dad in his tractor trailer truck and ride around for a while doing that, but that didn't quite work out. A little too girlish. Didn't realize I was quite so girlish until I had to drive behind a truck for a while and not take a shower every day. But I wanted a job that did everything. That meant the end of racism, the end of environmental injustice, the end of economic injustice, peace. Don't you think peace is it? So thank you, I think so too. That's how I define peace. So my first job out of college was with SANE, which became Peace Action right away. And it was great people I still know and love there, but another cold water in the face when after a couple of years of doing what I thought was my part, because I feel like it's all our job. Creating democracy is all our job. I don't need to take on a big piece. I'll take on my piece. So I worked in the evening, and we worked with the phone canvas. We raised money, raised lots of money. And I didn't go to staff meetings or things like that, because that was the daytime with the other people who were running things. I was just doing my little piece. Well, after a couple of years, I did go to a staff meeting, because I thought maybe we could translate things into Spanish. Well, the reaction of folks, and it wasn't that people were wrong or closed-minded, it just didn't seem like a priority, the connection between translating things into Spanish and reducing the amount of money for MX missiles that year. So our agendas weren't quite there, right? My agenda was broad peace, grassroots up democracy, and the agenda there then was, let's get Congress to reduce this piece of budget. It's not a bad strategy, it just didn't fit with where I was, and I learned that. So it was more wake up in the face. So that was a big one. I was happy being in DC and learned a lot there, but it didn't necessarily help me feel like we were on the right track and that the elected officials were going to get us what we needed. It was a little bit, but I hadn't given up on the electoral process and I haven't yet either, but I was learning more. In 1990 in North Carolina, y'all might know this, not know this, and the ones who are older might know, but younger folks won't know the name Harvey Gantt necessarily. He ran for Senate. I was happy in DC, working out things, doing some good anti-oppression work with folks at Sane Freeze, and them developing excellent skills on building community, which we're going to talk some about. That's what I think is part of what we need to do, is just build effective community. And that was happening. So I didn't necessarily want to go back to North Carolina and participate in the Harvey Gantt for Senate campaign. So I called back to my friends and said, y'all don't need me to come do any kind of GOTV work, do you? You don't need me to do anything. I can stay here. Well, the answer was not yes. So I went back to North Carolina and helped get out the vote training and organizing in the most rural parts of North Carolina where the Democratic Party wouldn't spend any money because there were too few people, too low turnout levels, you know, too few people who went to college, we're not going to bother with them. So the 12 to 14 most rural counties in the state were where we focused working. These were where low-income Black, Native, and Latino folks lived, low-income white folks lived, and we organized among all those people. We had a 72% voter turnout in those counties. Oh, well. Yeah, that's not bad, but we were also the testing ground for stealing elections. Two key things that happened during those elections. One that was hilarious. We worked in a place where most of the industry was textile mills. People had been working short hours all through the fall, all through September, all through October. Short shifts, short hours. The week before elections, double shifts. The day after elections, back to short shifts. Not illegal, is it? But if you don't show up, you lose your job. So this was before, you know, they figured it. Now we have same day, we have early voting and all kinds of things, but no, they were testing. The other thing, if y'all didn't hear about it, because this is worth sharing, because it was so heinous at the time, now it's normal. Harvey Gantt, Black, y'all might have not known that, running against Jesse Helms. We won't say much about Jesse Helms. I lost my college scholarship because of a little letter I sent him, though, about him getting stuff back, so oops. It was seen as a threat, whatever. That's another story. Y'all catch me tell that story. So Gantt's running against Jesse Helms, and the 11th hour ad, because jobs were leaving the state, jobs were going out of the country. And at the 11th hour, you see a voiceover talking about job loss, talking about things not working, talking about not taking not making any risky changes in what's going on, meaning not to get anybody but Jesse Helms. And then you see there's a severance slip, right? You've lost your job, 2 weeks notice slip, and a hand that crumbles it up with his, rolled up flannel shirt, white hand crumbled it up, throwing it. It was just so blatantly racist, so blatantly like, you elect Harvey Gantt, you'll have more unemployment. It was just horrible, a horrible ad. But now that's common. The testing ground for what happened with stolen elections, I feel, was places like, not just rural North Carolina, but places like North Carolina. In 1995, I became a member of the Independent Progressive Politics Network. I went to their meeting in Atlanta at a historical Black university there that right now is forgetting. Yes, on Emory campus, thank you very much. And that to me made sense in the same way that peace made sense then and still does, because peace is all those things. Independent politics made sense as well, because we do need to engage in the political process in order to amass adequate power to put the fools out of commission in whatever way we need to. So I really became excited about that. So from 1995 to now, I've been very active with the Independent Progressive Politics Network, and in November of 2009, we helped found Move to Amend, and that's fantastic. And these days, I work for the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, and so I'll talk to you a little bit about that. But between coming back to North Carolina in 1990 and somewhere in between 90 and 95, 96, in doing organizing, training with people, some of the lessons I learned are some that we've missed as a movement. One of the basic ones, when you're doing community organizing with low-income people, everyone's low-income, that's a common denominator. Some people went to college, some people didn't finish high school. But one of the things that is really important is, and I learned this, is to be able to listen more than you talk and create space that those people can fill. Now, I know that sounds very simple, but I want to give you a couple examples of what that looks like. I traveled lots when I was doing work in rural North Carolina, but I did have me a mill house in a mill town, and I had some neighbors down the streets, the Roberts. And whenever I was in town, Miss Roberts, bless her heart, she'd walk down on Saturday, see my car in the yard, she'd come knock on the door, and she'd come in and she'd chat and talk, and we'd spend time chatting and talking. She always brought me some food, which was great, because I wasn't there often enough to cook. So I love that. Well, one Saturday, she didn't come. I was in town, I was missing Miss Roberts. I wanted to see her. So I walked down to her house. Saturday morning, I opened the door, barely knocking, because this is how we are. We keep our doors open, and we walk on in. So Miss Roberts wasn't there, but her husband was. Now, I'd seen Mr. Roberts at community meetings and things, but he was usually pretty quiet. Physically, he reminded me a lot of my father. Very big African-American man, dark skin, broad shoulders. He's sitting at the kitchen table, and I just go in and I see some cake on the counter in the kitchen near the sink. I go in, head for the cake, I'm pouring coffee. I'm just chattering, I'm just talking. Mr. Roberts hadn't said a word. Hadn't said a word, y'all. And I'm over at the sink, and I'm washing out a cup and getting coffee, and I start realizing, now, not just that I'm in his house and acting like I'm home, that's fine. That's not such a bad thing. But what I'm realizing is he's not speaking, and not only isn't he speaking, but his head's looking down, his shoulders are kind of in, collapsed a little bit. And I realized that hearing my own voice, the tone of my voice, the confidence of which I speak my words, in many ways the way I articulate and just put my sentences together, to him represents the voice of status quo power. The voice that, given his age, means you better recognize, you better capitulate in some way. And so I stopped looking at him directly, because I've been looking at him to get eye contact. I started looking at the sink and looking at the floor, looking at the stove, looking at the coffee top. I slowed down my speaking a little bit. Didn't quite talk so loud and so fast. And after a while, he raised his head and he looked at me. And that was a moment that taught me not just about who Mr. Roberts was, but also my dad. Because part of my reality growing up is having a father who, when the bill collector would come at the door, and was not a family who could pay the bills on time, would have that posture. Or sometimes when he was at the grocery store trying to cash a check. Or when he was at those stop points, that posture he would take. And as a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, I wasn't as proud as I wanted to be of my father, because he wasn't taking up his space in a way because it wasn't safe for him. He grew up in a time where if you fully take up your space as a black man, you will be lucky to be alive. So you have to take a certain posture. That's where Mr. Roberts was as well. So I learned something about Dad, but I also learned something about myself as an organizer. That if I come in, like a hurricane with people, especially people that don't have the same education level or the same cultural comfort with their own voice, and how many of us really do, then I'm not creating space for them to fill. And that was a huge lesson. The other huge lesson for me, which is really all about our own arrogance in many ways as organizers, is thinking we know what people's choices need to be. One of the campaigns we'd worked on was one where jobs were leaving the country and going south. And one of the people we worked with is a woman named Katie Adams. I'll never forget Katie because she was a low-income white woman. We did organizing meetings, and most of the people being displaced were women. And we did organizing meetings every week. We were preparing them to go to the head of the Proctor Silex their stakeholders meeting and doing a protest there and doing all this press. And CBS News was coming down. CBS News was doing a story about our work against Proctor Silex. And so Katie was going to be one of the speakers. So I'm giving her a ride home the night before the press conference. And she reveals to me for the first time in all these months that every time she went home from an organizing meeting, she was beaten by her husband. He had lost his job as well and lost his job before, but for reasons, that she didn't really share to me. I found out later his brother was a Klan member and there are all kinds of other things, but he didn't come to the meetings. And when she came home, there was an altercation every time. And I went back to the hotel that night, and I drove back like in a daze. And I called back, called Mona, and she got on the phone. Called Katie. She got on the phone, and I said, Katie, you do not have to put yourself at risk because of this. You don't have to be at the press conference tomorrow morning. You don't have to do that. We need to do whatever it is to keep you safe. She told me. She was like, oh, no, you don't. I mean, she told me where to go. She said, this is mine. I have done this. No one is going to take this away from me. And that taught me something, too, in terms of our making assumptions about people's choices. Now, surely, and yes, we did put in support systems so that Katie had other choices, but for me to assume, right, that to take away her opportunities to speak her voice, And that's our work as organizers, really, is to create methods and opportunities for people to find and use their own voice. And I want to underscore that I'm saying their own voice, not yours. One thing that's really frustrating for me about us as a movement or us as a people is way too often we're more interested in being right than winning. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? Right? My analysis, my ideology, my philosophy is the right one. And if you don't agree, then, and then that becomes the conversation. Instead of, cool, I'm glad you got an analysis and an ideology, so what we gonna do? Right? I want us to think about what we gonna do. All right, so, thank you very much. So, I want to remind you of something. I know you know this. And if I could do great visual aids, I'd do a visual aid about this. And some of y'all who I've had the pleasure of talking to before will have heard me say this, because I am either a consistent voice or a broken record. Either way. But I want to remind you that change is chaos. So I want you to think about this, because it's really important that we get this, because sometimes we feel like we are crazy, or what we're doing is crazy, and everybody else we're working with is crazy. You're right. Because it's chaos. Imagine status quo is the same today as it was yesterday. Everything's cool, everything's smooth. New information, once you get new information, the conditions change to adjust to that. And those conditions create the change, but it's also the chaos. And the new information can be good or bad. The new information could be the Peace Center got an endowment of $5 million. Y'all gonna have some chaos behind that, aren't you? It's gonna create some chaos. New information. Obama deported more people than Bush. Those of us working on immigration issues, that's some chaos for us. So since change is chaos, those of us who believe in and want change are going out creating chaos. That's our function in the world, create chaos. So, given that, let's be conscious. Let's name the chaos. Back when we were doing the organizing that I described in North Carolina, one of the great things about our organizing is we knew we were creating chaos. Bringing poor white, black, Latino, and Native people together in a place where the Klan was real comfortable, and not consciously think of what are the consequences of this. And we did, down to who's going to follow who home to make sure they get safe, and who are we going to do at the press conference to take the least risk, who can take that risk that week. That kind of consciousness about the kind of change you want to have, the kind of change that you are trying to create. So that it doesn't mean things are not going to be a mess. They will be. But often as progressives, we don't go in anticipating. We think that if something goes wrong, not the when. Y'all, it's a win, not an if. It's not an if you do something racist or classist or homophobic. It's when you do something racist or classist, because you will. And knowing that you will and having a plan for how do I deal with that is much better than pretending like it's not going to happen. So when you saw in the program, George, try to do your work, this is what I'm talking about. I know that there are plenty of y'all in here have done the intense, rigorous work of getting a PhD or some graduate degree, or even a law degree or a doctor's degree, but you haven't done the rigorous work of building an anti-oppression skill set. So I want to invite you to do that work, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. By starting with being conscious, you're developing a sense of consciousness for the kind of change that you want. There's some principles behind that change that I often talk about. I'm just going to name them here. I'm not going to go into them in detail. If you're around for the weekend and something to move to amend things, we may talk about it more. But they're simply collective vision, shared power, individual accountability, and strategic use of privilege. Some quick things about them. Got to have collective vision. Way too often, as a movement, we talk about shared vision. Big mistake. Huge mistake. Can't have a diverse movement without collective vision. Why? Because I ain't you. I didn't read the books you read. I don't really need to or want to. But I do have a vision of what justice looks like for me. I do have a vision of what peace means to me and what it means to my community. And that vision needs to be so personal, so vibrant, so vital to me, so strong that when my back is against the wall, it will keep me in it. Y'all have got a vision like that, don't you? Isn't it yours individually? You ain't giving it to nobody. It's yours. You need that because, again, not just if things get worse, when. Come on, y'all. When. The more we move, the more we have victories, the more difficult they're going to try to make it. We need that individual vision of what justice looks like, what peace feels like, and hold on to it. That's about the only thing I would encourage people to be vehemently attached to. And collectively, when you put that with other people's visions, then you've got something fantastic. Because while your vision isn't mine, this part of yours overlaps with mine, overlaps with theirs. It can be a beautiful thing. And that's fantastic. Shared power you know about and you can learn about. Individual accountability we're going to talk about some more because that's where building your anti-oppression skill set goes in. And strategic use of privilege, oh, to me that's the magic. That's like the syrup on the, on the ice cream. Because, well, the personal reason I've got to be honest, David Cobb's in the back and he'll hold me to be honest. Because of strategic use of privilege, I don't feel the need to want to kill white people. Just have to say that out loud. So it's the truth, I gotta say it. But what it means though is instead of, and a lot of it I will take responsibility for, is fueled by my experience as a young person hanging out with like white folks who try to pretend like they weren't white, try to pass for something else, oh my God. Or people who were wealthy try to pass for being poor. As a person who lived in poverty, that was very disrespectful. For you to, oh my God, I have no money today, and you got a trust fund. Okay, fine. But when we bring our privilege to the community for use to dismantle the barriers that exist for those of us who don't have that privilege, it becomes a fantastic tool. Nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to pretend like you don't have, something that actually is useful in the movement to destroy our current status quo set of repression and oppression for people. So for me, I have my inventory. I went to college. I can pass for Christian. I'm able-bodied. I'm, heterosexual. I knew there was more. So there are ways, and I'm a U.S. citizen. So there are ways I have privilege other folks don't. When I'm in relationship with them, that privilege I can use strategically to remove barriers they have to deal with. So when I'm in the grocery store and there's somebody who's struggling with their English, while my Spanish isn't so great, I can intervene in a way that's respectful to them, doesn't dishonor the person who's there not being as respectful as they could be, and hopefully helps to build community. And that's part of what you want to do with that. So if you're remembering that change is chaos, and so if you're feeling a little crazy, just be conscious about the kind of change you want to make, and create multiple access points for people who are not necessarily having the same experiences you've had or coming from the same point that you've had. So that means, to think about if you're doing a petition drive or you're trying to get people to come out to a meeting or you're trying to just do some basic education about an issue, think about where you're doing that. How often do you do that down at court when the day they're dealing with traffic violations, like people whose license plates have expired or they were driving with no insurance? Those are a lot of potential volunteers. A lot of those people are unemployed. A lot of those people aren't happy with how things are going. It's going to be a different conversation than you would have if you were doing it at the co-op, right? So I'm really encouraging you to go outside of your comfort zone when you're talking about building alliances in community. Most often, we tend to talk to people like us. Even if they don't look like us, they're shopping at the same places, they're going to the same festivals. Come on, y'all, get out of your backyard. Challenge yourself to the extent you can. And really, Department of Social Services, the health clinics, the courthouse on day when traffic violation day is the day I'm saying because it's not criminal in the same way. You're not necessarily dealing with somebody who's going to get locked up because you don't want to recruit somebody to volunteer and then they get locked up. That's a lot of wasted time. Oops, I lost one of these things, y'all. I'll try to fix it. So let's say you've got those access points and you're starting to talk to somebody at the DSS or the courthouse. Well, I said earlier, listen more than you talk. That's hard for some of us. I know that. Part of what you want to do, though, in listening for more than you talk, is to validate their experience. That's the first piece most people want in an interaction. They want who they are, what they think, how they feel validated. So somebody's different than you. You don't have to be a, hello there, I'm George Friday, and I'm trying to create a diversity experience by talking to someone in their teens. Can we chat? You know, I'm trying to work on my ageism issues by, it doesn't go like that, right? But what might work is starting out a conversation if I'm talking to a younger person, and for me, it's usually not younger people who are concerned so much about tuition costs as just economics in general. And so I might go up to somebody who's 17 or 18 and say, isn't it crazy? There's no jobs for y'all? That's all I got to say. And then just listen, you know? Often when I'm talking to people about peace and justice issues, I'll just walk up to somebody and say, isn't it terrible what they're doing to our boys and girls over there? I don't even have to say a country, y'all. All I got to say is over there. And just listen. And then I'll hear, my son was deployed to, my daughter was, my cousin was, and I just listen. Or with the case of the young person not having a job, they're trying to recruit me for such and such, they come to my school, they're doing, just listen. And in listening, you'll hear what's important to them. You'll hear at least 2 or 3 opportunities to connect to their issue, because the issues of regular people are our issues. There is no issue, and I rarely speak in absolutes, I want to be honest about that, but there is no issue I could think of that if you trace it, you're not going to get back to a corporation. A corporation wanting to make profit at the cost of people. I don't care, name it. Name it. You know? Can't afford your medicine, ain't got a job, can't afford your rent, name it. And so when you're talking to that person, no matter what their issue is, you know it's going to relate back to that. Now, that's your first interaction with that person. You don't pounce on them and say, okay, so you need to come to a meeting. You know, you can't be doing that. But what you can say is, usually I listen, and then I say, is there something, would you like to try to do something to change that? And almost always people say yes. And so then I'll give them a card, or I'll ask for their number, and I'll call them. Wouldn't assume for an email, because relationships are built face to face. I want to quote Yearwood. Reverend Yearwood said, we cannot blog the revolution, right? we can educate, we can do all kinds of things, but it has to be face-to-face contact. So those of y'all who aren't comfortable doing that, you're going to have to get over it, because that's what you got to do. And it means putting yourself in a position where you're not the expert. And let me tell you, it is such a relief to not have to be the smartest person in the room. It really is. I revel in knowing I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I don't need to be, and it's really great. So in building those relationships, it's important to seek out relationships. I want you guys to seek out relationships with people different than you, but in 2 kinds of categories. One is people who are vulnerable to be co-opted by the state. So find out who you know whose son, uncle, nephew, sister works for the cops or the military. There are plenty of people who I know who are in law enforcement or who are in the military because that was their economic choice. They have to pay the bills. There are ways that we try to demonize those folks when we know who the real enemy is. It's not them, it's the person writing the paycheck. Do not make an enemy of someone who could easily be an ally. And when things get really tight, if we've done our work well, those boys and girls will put down their weapons when we come walking. Okay? Okay? And this is really important, y'all, because we're at a point where we have to make that happen, because we do not have as many guns. And we do not want to put them in the position where they got to point a gun at family. All right? And you need to, if you don't feel like you're their family now, get to work so that they feel like you are family. Okay? That's my strategy for staying alive. I don't know about y'all. So build relationships with those who are vulnerable to being co-opted, and of course, build relationships with the communities that are most at risk with the state. That's not hard to figure out. That's black folks and the war on drugs. That's South Asian and Muslim folks and the so-called war on terror. That's all poor folks being demonized because wealthy people are realizing that the gig is up and they're starting to get, a little bit of pressure on them. It's peace and justice activists seen as terrorists? Come on. Those are the vulnerable communities. So if you reach out and build relationships with those communities on their issue, because at the root of the war on drugs are corporations. At the root of the war on terror, who's going to make money building fusion centers to put people in? And when we all get indefinitely detained because of our thought, they're going to put us in some center that's getting a profit. We need to make sure we're building relationships with those folks, and we stop that from happening. So those are the kinds of ways to start with people. Start by listening more than you talk. Really hear them. Use what they say as a way of validating their experience, but also connecting them to an issue that is your priority, your agenda, but take some time and develop the relationship. Don't imagine that everything's going to happen overnight. There was a couple of other things I really wanted to share. How am I doing on time, Stan? Okay, that's not bad. Wow. Okay, that went quickly, I guess. It did. So I want to give you a little bit of idea of how to begin this work. I don't assume everyone's an organizer, but if you're not willing to do the organizing, who in your circle is? That's my only question. Because some of y'all won't, for whatever reasons, not all of us have the same skill set, that's cool, but someone in your family, in your organization, in your crew has to say, okay, I'm willing to knock on the doors. I'm willing to make the phone calls. I'm willing to go sit in church and dress right when you go to church, y'all. Come on. Because, no one's going to hear us if, no one's going to hear our brilliant message if we mess it up by how we look. It's crazy, it's superficial, it's silly, but it's the truth. If I go to a church in North Carolina, I do my little do. Sometimes I wear a hat. I definitely put on stockings and heels. Serious. Because you want to get heard. So, again, don't create any barriers between yourself and the people that you care about. Again, is it more important to be right or to win? If you think, oh, I'm not even going to do that, then you're putting your ego before the issue. And often that's another of our problems. Our ego gets in the way. And that it would take too long for me to talk to y'all about that. Work on it. God bless you. Let the ego out. And one huge piece, I think, for us as a movement and for us as individuals around doing your work is doing grieving work. I want you to let go. Grieving is ultimately letting go at a very deep level. Many of us, all of us that are over, 40 is what Ben generously said. I'll say over 50 because I am. But I think I'll take 40 or 30. We need to grieve that this country, this culture is not the lie we were taught it was. Because for many of us at a deep level, we still hold on to those expectations. And we haven't done a grieving process of really letting go. And some of our resentment, some of our anger, some of our rage is about not realizing that, especially those of y'all who are white, and especially those of y'all who are white men. And if you don't acknowledge that it's there, I don't believe you're being honest with yourselves or each other. Because those of y'all who are over 40, we're conditioned to believe that as a white man, here's what you're going to get. And most of you aren't getting it. And some of you may have said, I chose consciously not to get that. Cool. But that still means somewhere inside is that voodoo, that toxic stuff. You got to weed that out. You got to grieve that. You got to let that go. In doing that, also let go of the concept that how we approach change, even in the way Stan beautifully described, the movements of the past, is not the way we do it now. We're in conditions that have never existed before. So to expect that we could go back to some model that's 30, 40, 50, 100 years old and have a revolution based on that is not smart. Okay? Thanks. I'm not saying there aren't valuable lessons to be learned, But I know in my gut, no, I have not done any empirical research, but I know in my gut that we are at unprecedented times. These are fantastic times for our work, and we'll talk about this on the panel later. But in terms of bringing together movements, communities of people that are different at a scale that can really pull down this repressive government, we haven't been this close ever. It's a great time for us. But we can't approach it in the same old ways because they didn't even work then in some ways. Some of us, I mean, if I were able to be active during the civil rights movement, as a woman, I have a feeling my voice would have been a little bit squashed. How about y'all? I mean, from what I've heard and read from the women who were part of it. So I'm not saying there was something wrong with that. I'm saying let's learn from those lessons and do better. We can. We are brilliant collectively. So we deserve to do better, and we can do better. So let's make sure we do that. So I talked about detaching from being right. One of the things that we miss is celebrating with each other and celebrating often. Sometimes what are small steps? When you're working with community folk, you have got to not just validate their experience and help them find and use their voice, but celebrate those steps. Y'all don't think that the day after we did that press conference, we had a huge party and Katie celebrated and everybody celebrated, and yes, her kids and her husband was there, and it was great energy. Those kind of steps, especially acts of courage people take. If someone in your circle writes an op-ed for the first time, have a party, at least a cake, something. You know, well, not necessarily cake. Clearly, I like to eat, but, you know, something. And make sure, too, that if you're, especially those of you who are stepping outside of your community of origin, find ways to validate that work. Because as a white person working with people of color, as a straight person working with gay and lesbian people, as a person with resources and wealth working with poor people, you're not going to get validation for those people for your good work. I do not want a white person coming to me for validation and being an anti-oppression person. You know, you're not going to get any attaboys, attagirls from me for not being racist. What? Where you been? That's all you're going to get from me. And the reality is, I know it is hard work. I know it is really difficult to be a white ally, especially when, as I'm encouraging you to do, to go to a community you're not comfortable with. You can go to that community and people are like, what you doing here? I don't care about. And you might get that for a minute. Keep going. Keep doing the work. Keep showing up at the meeting. Don't take up too much space. Listen more than you speak. Work on their issue. Share about your issue, and you'll get there. But without a doubt, you're not going to get validated by those folks. So go to people like you. Get a group of anti-racist folks, and y'all pat each other in the back. Get a group of straight folks who are helping with gay, lesbian, bi folks, and y'all pat each other in the back. But don't look for validation from the folks you're working for their benefit, because for them it's like, where you been? That's all you're going to get from them. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just the truth. So I know that I need, I've got 5 more minutes, so I don't have to quickly finish now. I hope the way I've shared things has made some sense. It does feel like y'all are in my living room, which is really good. And so I want to talk a little bit about, so where are we going to go from here? Let's say y'all do that. Let's say everybody out here goes back to your group. You identify who's willing to knock on doors and make phone calls. So somebody's going to knock on doors and make phone calls. Identify the vulnerable groups where you live. Are they, who's getting their tuchus kicked? I know I'm in sacred space, so I don't want to say any other word. I think I can say tuchus. So look in the papers. Look in the last 6 months, the last year. Who's been the racial profiling? Somebody's mosque has been jumped on. A lesbian or gay group has been messed with. A bunch of young people are being forced to sign up for the military. The issues are there. And then you go sit with those folks. And over time, you're building relationships with them. And over time, you get to introduce, well, like, who's making money off of this? Because somebody's making money off all of it. And bring that analysis into it as you're building a movement. And that movement will then be applicable to whatever issue we need to work on. Yes, it may be corporations, but then next week it may be what's going on with school-to-prison pipeline, and everybody goes and deals with that. And then the week after there, it may be what's going on with deportations, and everybody goes and deals with that. So that way we aren't multi-issue. It's about a movement. It's about power. So everyone has a stake, Everyone has something to contribute. None of us have all the answers. And everyone has value. So thank you for seeing the value in everyone, and me too. I appreciate this. All right. Can you give a good example of cross-movement organizing that was successful? Tell us how it worked. Well, my best example, I'd say, is the process with the U.S. Social Forum. I've had the honor to be on the National Planning Committee since 2007, and the first and second U.S. Social Forums both had good examples of this. I think I'll talk about the first one because the first one was in Atlanta, so the South, and one of the great or horrible realities of the South is that labor isn't really the strongest there. We're going to say it that way. I live in a right-to-work state. Do y'all know what that means? Right. Yeah, the right to get fired anytime. And so at the first U.S. Social Forum, there was the Poverty Working Group that's still active and is doing a one class, one movement process now. But they were able to get together with folks that were doing labor pieces and actually formed at that U.S. Social Forum in '07 a union for day laborers and for women who do mostly housework and domestic work. Domestic Workers Union was founded at that social forum, and that was several movements coming together to do that. So I think that was definitely a successful example of cross-movement organizing. They had done work coming into the social forum there in 2007, met for the first time face-to-face there, left with chapters for Domestic Workers Union. Crisis, something, change. Yeah, crisis does create change. We must destroy something to rebuild it. Can you alter our world without destruction? Chaos and change. Yes, without destruction. Well, this is not to be flippant about the answer, but it does depend on how you define destruction. I'd say there has to be transformation, there has to be evolution, but to me, burning something is also transformation. And from the ashes, you can use that as part of the compost for something new to grow. So the answer is yes and no. That what I mean by that is things will not have the same form and shape as they did before. Nothing is ever completely destroyed. I'm not going out to destroy anything, but I do have to give this example. I was going to not do this, but I need to. In Greensboro, North Carolina, there's a regular round table every Wednesday around a church, and people come. Sometimes there's 80 people, sometimes there's 18 people or 8 people. And there's a gentleman who comes every week, and he's been around a long time. He was, he knew King and marched in Selma and all that good stuff. And he was talking about his early days of working with some of the powers that be. And he mentioned several pieces of legislation he helped to write and said things like, I think, he talked about the years, and these were like 1969 was one of the years, 1972 was one of the years, and he's talking about being in the offices with congressmen and senators and trying to get legislation passed around jobs, around housing, around economics. And one of the phrases that he said during his talk recently was, thank you, one of the things he said was, and they wouldn't let us introduce the legislation. They wouldn't let us introduce the bill. I can't even describe my reaction as he was talking, right? They wouldn't let us. And while I, at my core, will never go out intentionally to do harm to another being, I, in my heart, know I want us to build a movement strong enough that we can go to the seats of power and dismantle the buildings brick by brick unless they deliver on the justice we all deserve. Oh, yeah. So, but I'm not violent, for real. Okay, so what do I think about people of color only spaces and social justice movements? Absolutely essential. In the same way that I said, y'all aren't gonna get validation from us, so y'all go hang out with other, white people or other straight people or whatever. Very good. There are days, and I'm realizing for the first time, I don't do this so much anymore, or maybe I do it so naturally that I don't think of it as a conscious thing, but I used to consciously create white-free days. Woo! Yes, Lord. Nothing on television, no music, no people. And of course, this isn't because I have a lack of love for people, but it's because the culture, we're just assaulted on certain levels with what is normal and what is good and it's always an image of white people, whether it's on TV and this is the relationship you need to have, or this is the waistline you need to have, or whatever it is, it's too much, too much. So every now and then, I would create white-free space and white-free days. No white people for 24 hours, 48 hours, 36 hours. And occasionally, I would have a cocooning weekend. Thursday, I'd buy everything I want. I'd go home. I've got chants I would listen to and books I would read and music I would listen to. But not until Sunday morning would I emerge. No whites from Friday morning to Sunday morning. Lovely. Now, this isn't, of course, it's not personal. It really is about emotional and psychological well-being. It's about knowing what the culture can do to us at a subconscious level and trying to weed some of that out on a regular basis. Because otherwise, it's in there, y'all. And if y'all don't have a process to weed the crap out that the stuff that you're getting on a regular basis that you don't necessarily invite or need, please think of a process. Because it's there, and it undermines our ability to have that vibrant vision and to connect with each other because it's just in the way. All right, I hope I answered that well. Let's see. Here we go. I still got time to answer questions, Stan, I guess? Can you speak more about validating other people's experience? Well, it's not saying you're right, I'm on your side, you go. It's just about hearing them. And what's really amazing is if you listen to someone else, they don't necessarily need you to say, I agree absolutely with exactly what you're saying. They just want to be heard. It really is that simple. And when they're speaking, you listen, and what I validate then is what they've said. I never, ever, 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 especially in the first conversation, and usually probably the first 3 to 5 conversations, maybe by the third conversation, I'm realizing how much this is like a date. Maybe by the third conversation, I will put in a little bit of my thinking, right? A little bit of my ideology or my agenda so they know. And from jump, I make it really clear who I am because you don't want to seem like you're being dishonest or not transparent with people. I'll say, I'm George and I work for Revolution or whatever. And then but that's usually after I've said, what they do in our boys and girls over there ain't right. And they'll talk da-da-da. And then I'll introduce myself and say who I am and then say, one of the things I know we can do is, try to stop the war or whatever. One statement that first time. And then as you're validating them, you just take what they say and you reframe that. I hear you talking a lot. You're really concerned about your child in junior high school and how the military is trying to really recruit them. I know some people that are working on that. Have you ever heard of the American Friends Service Committee? It's just, that's the validation that I'm talking about. If that's not enough of an answer, whoever wrote this on Carolina Blue, love that color, come and get me. Okay. Can you talk more about your work at the Bill of Rights Defense Committee? Absolutely. It's an honor to be the National Field Organizer for the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, and we are working to get local counties, local cities to take an aggressive stance vis-a-vis the federal government by passing legislation, ordinances, or and sometimes resolutions, but mostly ordinances, so it has teeth, that says we will not allow our local police force to do the work of ICE, DHS, or the FBI. Yeah. Thank you very much. This is the kind of thing you could do wherever you live. Let me know. We can talk, and we can connect you with folks where you are that may be working on indefinite detention provisions of the NDAA. We have campaigns there where people are working against that. We also have our local civil rights restoration efforts and campaigns where people are working to pass these laws. And in doing so, we bring together the communities African American communities, the immigrant community, the South Asian Muslim community, the peace and justice community, all the people that are at risk from state power, and together that coalition works with elected officials to get these laws on the books. We also find ourselves working with chiefs of police and police officers because y'all may not find it a surprise. I mean, law enforcement have plenty to do. They don't need to be doing the surveillance for the FBI. They don't need to be checking people's papers for ICE. So it actually is a relief to them, even though we are on the offensive. We take a very offensive, aggressive stance. We're not leaning back to do this. We are, you know, we're not doing the example of waiting to let them allow us to introduce legislation. We're making demands of power. Why did you become a founding member of Move to Amend? Well, the Independent Progressive Politics Network we're part of since 1995. Part of our mission statement is to confront the corporately controlled Democrat and Republican Party. And that's been the mission since 1995. Just as POCLAD, the People's on Corporations, Law, and Democracy, have been working against corporate power for way long before Citizens United. So us dealing with Citizens United and Move to Amend is a natural progression of that. And for me personally, even though it's heinous in many ways, it's also an opportunity because it's so flagrant. I mean, you know, corporations, this isn't new. Y'all know this isn't new. I about lost my mind. I believe it was, oh gosh, early 90s, I went to a meeting where the Ferguson, Vervey, some lawyer in the room will know the case where they said money is speech. That was already established. I about lost my mind that day. I remember walking around DC going, money is speech, right? So that was even before Citizens United, and it felt so obscene that because you have more money, you have more right to be heard. Just sick. So it was only natural to be part of Move to Amend. And I will go on record. This won't the first time, so I'm not going on record, you know, for forever, but for here, by saying I think that moving to amend in that first piece is a first step. Because I want to, right? Let's talk about a real Constitution. Ben said it. Everybody knows it. Constitution, hardly any of us would be part of that original thing. Why in the world would we have a document that's our guiding law of the land that isn't relevant to most of the people that live on the land? Oh, that's so crazy. So that's what's up with that. Uh-oh. I think my time is probably up, so I'm not even going to address another question, but I'm thrilled to be here. Thank y'all for having this chat with me. Yay! Woo! Oh, Lord. All right. Okay. Wow. Wow. I'm going to have to use the mic. Okay.